But I got the impression that I'm being asked to speak about the difference between what the Bible teaches and what we're being told all the time from every other source in our culture at this present time, which includes virtually every imaginable variant of normal sexual behavior, and is seeking not only to identify it by names, but to celebrate it as something that everybody should be very happy to see, a great opening up of the culture to, people who have a different way of feeling about sex and about identity and gender. And so, frankly, I think most of us, even people who are not Christians, I can't see how they cannot be getting sick of this subject, because it's shoved down our throats in the news, in the movies, in the TV shows, virtually everywhere. This particular new agenda is being presented to us as normative, and we're being asked, almost demanded, to celebrate it and say, why shouldn't people do things that were always considered previously to be perverted, corrupt, mentally ill, things like that. Those are the classifications for behaviors that we're now told to celebrate. Now, it may be that those classifications are outmoded. Maybe those classifications came about at a time when people were less enlightened, before we had as much information as we now have. This is, I think, probably what most non-Christians assume. I don't know what, I'm not speaking for most non-Christians, I'm a Christian, but I think that most people, Christian or non-Christian, if they are beginning to have some sympathy, let's say, for the alternative identities, gender identities and so forth, and lifestyles, that they are probably thinking, well, we live in a scientific age. The Bible's kind of old-fashioned. For a long time, Western civilization was just kind of stuck in this, quagmire of biblical thinking, which is now so outdated and so 18th century that, in our modern scientific age, we certainly have to change our thoughts about many things. And it is true that we do change our thoughts about many things. There was a time when people thought the world was flat, and it has been scientifically demonstrated that that is not so. There are still some flat earth people. The ones who are probably the same ones who are the King James onlys, and people who really get kind of stuck in an old way of thinking, and they see everything as a conspiracy to undermine, the sanity of society in past generations. And that is the right way to look at some issues, the ones that are actually where science has actually directed us in a new direction. Of course, we have to be careful about what we say science is saying, because science is one thing, and a scientist is another thing. It's just like saying theology is one thing, and theologians are another thing. Theology is the study and knowledge of God. A theologian is just someone who has opinions about theology. A scientist is somebody who has an opinion about science. Science is truly truth. In fact, the word science in Greek means knowledge. It is simply knowledge. And in modern times, science is identified with basically experimentation and discovery and confirmation of theories and proofs and so forth through evidence. This is what modern science is about. And that particular science has not supported the new moves in the way of gender theory. In fact, what we call gender theory today, or critical gender theory, arose back not too very long ago with a man named John Money, who was a psychiatrist, psychologist who experimented with kids and sexual identity and tried to find out if maybe someone could be considered to be a different gender than they seem to have been born. John Money was from New Zealand, a psychologist actually, a sexologist, and he became very famous, very celebrated. He won many awards, academic awards, for his research on sexual identity and biology. He lived from 1921 to 2006, and he is the originator of what we call modern gender theory. Until his time, the word gender referred to a grammatical feature. In many languages like Latin and Greek and German, every noun has a gender. It's masculine or feminine. Sometimes some of these languages have a neuter gender. And the gender has nothing to do with sex. It's just a grammatical expression that determines which form of pronouns you're going to use in association with certain words. And if you've studied any foreign language that has gender, you know how difficult it is for English-speaking people to learn, which words are considered masculine, which are feminine, which are neuter, because it's not obvious. For example, the German word for girl, Mädchen, is a neuter word. Now, it's not suggesting that girls are neuters. It's just saying in grammar, that particular word is a neuter word. So you've got gender until the time of John Money, actually, was simply a grammatical term. It didn't refer to biology at all. But he's the one who introduced the idea that a person might be biologically of one sex, but of a different gender. His ideas, of course, didn't have any science behind them. How could you prove such a thing? Because gender, as it's being defined by John Money and ever since then by those who are involved in the radical critical gender theory, gender is simply a subjective thing. Now, biology is not subjective. Sex is not subjective, except in extremely rare, rather deformed kind of cases. Every baby is instantly recognizable as male or female. Not only in the human species, but every sexual species, every mammalian species. So it's not really a subjective thing. If you have certain kinds of features of your DNA, you're a male. If you have different features in your DNA, you're a female. And that DNA is in every cell of your body. You can't change your sex unless you change every cell, because your natural cells, whether you have a Y chromosome or not, really is what it comes down to. It determines whether you're a male or female from birth, or even from before birth, in the womb, from conception. So sex is an objective scientific phenomenon. Also, with most animals, and with humans certainly, there are anatomical differences between male and female. In fact, that's the way you know what your baby is instantly. You don't necessarily have to get a DNA sample of your baby to know if it's a boy or a girl, because there are anatomical features that obviously distinguish it. And this has always been true. There's never been any confusion about this in the whole human race until John Money. And John Money decided, well, sex is one thing, gender is another thing. Now, what's he mean by that? Well, gender is a psychological state. Well, scientists can't look at a psychological state. A psychological state is what somebody feels, or what they say they feel, or what they imagine, or what they think. And that's what's going on inside somewhere. You can't do a brain scan and decide if a person is, transgender. It's not a brain thing. It's a psychological thing. It's something that the mind produces, or in some cases that is imposed on the mind from other sources. But the point is that what you feel about your sex is considered to be what your gender is. So if you were born a male and you kind of feel like a female, or vice versa, then the assumption is you are misgendered, that the doctors assigned you the wrong gender. That's the term they use. The gender that is, the sex that is assigned to you at birth by the doctor. Listen, doctors don't assign sex. They just recognize sex. Sex is assigned, apparently, by God, or if there's no God, by something farther back than conception. Because as soon as there's conception, there is scientific, biological sex present. No one is assigning that except nature or God, certainly factors much more authoritative than any doctor, and certainly any gender theorist. Now, the fact that children sometimes grow up thinking they are different than they really are, it shouldn't surprise anybody. Not every little boy has a phase where he thinks he's a girl or wants to be a girl. Not every little girl has a phase where she wants to be a boy or thinks she's a boy. But most kids go through phases where they think they're something, Superman, or a nurse, or a soldier, something they're not. I mean, children pretend to be things, and sometimes they even imagine themselves to be things. And they grow up, and they get in touch with reality. And reality is a very immovable and stubborn phenomenon. Because if you think you're Superman when you're 3 years old, reality is going to catch up with you. And you're soon going to find out that's not reality, that's not truth. And if you think you're a girl, but you've got a boy's DNA and a boy's anatomy, well, then you're equally mistaken. There are people in mental institutions who think they are Napoleon. Now, they're not. And we've got people now saying, I identify as a Korean. You've seen that news story recently. That was not too long ago. A man who's not Korean, but who's a big fan of a Korean music star, decided that he's always felt like he's Korean. And he's had all kinds of expensive surgeries to change his looks where he looks Korean. But he's not. And the Korean community is not eager to welcome him as a Korean, by the way. They know he's not. You become a Korean, really there's just one way to become a Korean. That's have Korean parents. You become a certain sex by being born that way. There are people who either seriously or jokingly have said, there was a man in his 70s who he identifies himself as a 49-year-old, and he wanted that changed on his birth certificate. I don't think they did it. I think this was in England, as I recall. But frankly, if he said, if he didn't say, I identify as a younger man, but I identify as a woman, they probably would have accommodated him. Because it hasn't gone as far in that direction yet as it is going.